This happened a little over a decade ago when I was an undergrad. I worked as a pharmacy technician my sophomore through senior years. At a pharmacy, like any other stores, you have regulars. One regular was Joe, a man in his mid-30s with long straggly hair and an affinity for bizarre outfits. He was very sweet, but also very ill, mentally and physically. He was on a cocktail of antipsychotics, anti-anxiety, anti-depression, etc. He was also on medicine for AIDS. Normally, Joe came in with his mother, who took care of him. However, his mother was an elderly and she had her own health problems. Toward the end of my junior year, Joe started coming in by himself. He couldn't drive, so he'd walk from his home or take a taxi. Joe told me frequently that I looked like a young Michelle Pfeiffer, that I should be in LA, yada yada. Aside from my curly blonde hair, I never really saw a resemblance, but okay. I was polite, told him thanks, asked how his mother was, made general small talk while I rang up his scripts. He never gave me the beware vibe. My senior year, Joe's mother came in without him and told us that Joe wasn't doing well. He was refusing to take antipsychotics and she was getting too old to defend herself if Joe went into a rage. She was having him placed in a home for patients like Joe. I didn't know until that day that Joe was technically under guardianship. The courts and his doctors deemed him too ill to make important financial and medical decisions. Joe's mother gave us a medical release so that Joe's new home could send their staff to pick up his medicine. We didn't see Joe for about 4 months. It was the end of my senior year, a Friday night. Just me and the pharmacist were working because Friday nights are slow. I was reading a magazine when I heard, "Hey Michelle." I'm not Michelle, so I didn't look up. Then an angry, "Michelle!" and a slap on the counter in front of me made me look up. It was Joe. He was bleeding profusely and he left a bloody handprint on the counter. I was shocked, and all I could do was slowly back away to put distance between myself and the very bloody Joe. The pharmacist came rushing over asking Joe what he was doing here. His home had picked up his meds on Tuesday. "I wanted to see Michelle," said Joe. "I miss her." Then he started trying to open the waist-high door to get behind the pharmacy counter. The pharmacist called the store manager and told the manager to call 911 while she called Joe's mother. "Michelle, come here. Give me a hug." "No, I don't think that would be appropriate, Joe." "Give me a hug." He just started screaming this over and over and attempting to climb over the counter. The pharmacist told me to go into the back storage room and lock the door. This just pissed off Joe even more, and he started picking up items which covered them in blood and threw them at us. It was a chaotic mess. A patron was about to attempt to subdue him, but the pharmacist and I both shouted not to touch him due to him being covered in blood and positive for HIV. We told the small crowd that had formed to leave for their safety as Joe was still flinging items and getting blood everywhere. Eventually, the police and the EMT arrived. The store manager must have explained the blood and HIV issue because they came in with full protective gears on, long gloves, face masks, etc., and were able to forcibly sedate Joe. The store had to be shut down, and a special cleaning crew had to come in and clean the entire store. Joe's mother came to apologize after the store reopened. She explained that Joe had developed an obsession over me and grew angrier and angrier each month when his home would not allow him to tag along to pick up his meds. He attacked one of the other home residents the night of the incident, so the home grounded him and sent him to his room. Joe broke his window and crawled out, through broken glass and walked to the pharmacy. The home did not know he had broken out until his mother called frantically. His mother was considering suing the home for negligence, and she had Joe moved to a more secure mental health facility. This happened nearly 5 years ago. but unfortunately, the memory remains very ingrained in my mind. Bit of context to get started. I live in a medium-sized city that in 2011 was badly affected by a strong earthquake. Around 200 were killed, and a large portion of the city's older buildings were either outright destroyed or deemed uninhabitable. One such building was affectionately coined Mental Rehabilitation Center, Sunnyside. Naturally, having a significant number of mentally ill patients without a roof over their heads only exacerbated the city's problems at this stage, and short-term solutions were desperately in need. From my understanding, hospitals with the necessary facilities took the bulk of the load, while other temporary hospices and homestays were forced to become somewhat more of a permanent fixture, even if they lacked the security that previously would have been a necessity to house these patients. I would later come to learn that one of these temporary hospices was less than a block from my house. My house, along with the majority of the house on my street, had a small creek running behind the backyards. It ran throughout the town. It is relatively common for neighbors to wade down the creek to visit those who live a few houses along or on the other embankment, and virtually none of the properties have a back fence which prevents access. So it's about 4 weeks after the initial quake, and things are beginning to return to some sense of normalcy. We are still being forced to use the communal portable toilets out on the road, but in general, we are on the mend. It was a Sunday night, and I had gone to bed early because the next day was going to be my first day back at work in almost a month. At some point in the night, which I later found out it was around 1:30 a.m., I began to stir as I realized the soft laughter I was hearing in my dreams was actually a physical, real-life laugh. It was very faint, childlike almost, a giggle. Sitting up in my dull state, I assumed my brother had left the television on in the lounge. So, dragging myself out of the bed, I staggered down the hallway to switch it off. However, as I approached the living room, I soon realized that the laughter isn't increasing in volume, and upon reaching the room, I confirmed that indeed there's no TV or radio producing any sound. Suddenly, feeling a bit foolish, I make my way back towards my room where I hear no further giggling. Passing it off as my sleep-deprived brain playing tricks on me, I get back into bed and soon fall asleep. An hour later, I was again stirred awake, this time by the soft plucking of my steel-string guitar, which I kept in my office at the other end of the hall. No discernible melody, just random touches. Feeling very frustrated at this point for being woken twice in one night, I immediately fling myself out of bed, determined to find the source of these irritating noises. Before I even make it 2 steps towards the door, the noise comes to abrupt halt, and I realize that it too was coming from my room. More perplexed and angry at this point, I whirl around to see what could possibly be producing this noise, and all at once I feel like the wind has been knocked out of me. Sitting in the corner of my room, cross-legged, on a puddle of wet carpet, is a large, shaggy man wearing soaked clothes and holding my guitar. A million simultaneous thoughts go through my mind at this point. The obvious what the fuck, who the fuck, and how the fuck were very prevalent, but also more bizarre thought processes like, God, it annoys me when people touch my guitar without asking. All logical thoughts seemed to come to a complete standstill at that point, and for whatever reason, some deep-seated social cue came roaring to life, and my mouth sputtered out the words. Would you like a cup of tea? Because, obviously the first thing you do when someone comes to your house is offer them a cup of tea, right? The man seems pleased with this interaction. He perks up and nods brightly. Finally, the rational part of my brain awakens from its coma, and I turn and sprint from the room, slamming it shut behind me. I scream for my brother to call the police while holding onto the door handle with all my might, dreading the desperate struggle that was sure to happen. There's a man in my fucking room! He comes running, and once seeing the look of terror on my face, does not waste time in making the call. While listening to give him the operator our address and pleading with them to hurry, I hear a soft knock knock on the other side of the door.
No sugar, please.
The word bamboozled comes to mind when I think about this moment. I fully expected to reach down, pinch my arm, and awaken from the most vivid dream of my life. The police arrived not long after. At the time, there were many patrols to deter looters, and my brother led them to me and the end of the hall. My knuckles were turning white on the doorknob. After mentally bracing myself, I let go of the handle and leapt backward, letting the policemen do their thing. They rushed into the room, tasers drawn, shouting at this home invader to show himself. Their aggression was short-lived, however, and I was still close enough to see why. The man was simply sitting on the edge of my bed now, amusing himself playing with one of my figurines. I think the officers were also taken aback by this, as they halted for a second before continuing, a touch more gingerly. To cut a rather long-winded story short, and to confirm what you probably have already deduced, yes, this man was a mental patient who had slipped out of his temporary hospice and waited along the river looking for houses to explore. Muddy footprints on my neighbor's decks confirmed that he had originally tried to enter their homes. I was simply the one foolish enough to leave his door unlocked. The police took him away, and they later gave me a follow-up call to tell me that he had been put in a much more secure location, but that I should still be a lot more vigilant when it comes to securing my house. In hindsight, I believe this man was totally harmless. Ill, yes, obviously, but not malicious. There was ample opportunity when he could have harmed me, had it been his intent, but he did not do so. He simply took my unlocked door as an invitation to come in. I did not press charges, as I did not want to damage the life of an already damaged person. The incident left me pretty shaken up for quite some time, and I still struggle falling asleep sometimes, but for the most part, I have moved on. There is one thing that I have not been able to let go, however. I believe this one detail has left a permanent scar on my psyche. As the police were leading the man from my house, he uttered a short giggle, the same one I had heard when I was awoken originally.
The man couldn't find me under his bed.
Hi there, I was just reminded of something that happened many years ago to my grandparents, and I wanted to get it to you before I forget it again. The family story goes like this. The old house my grandparents lived in was a very old log one that was built before the Civil War. I loved going there, but I was always creeped out because right inside the front door was a bloodstain that couldn't be removed. It was from a young man who was shot as he was trying to run away back home after a terrible battle known as the Battle of the Hemp Bales. It didn't much look like a bloodstain anymore, but more like a deep brownish stain. That soldier and the blood doesn't have anything to do with this story though. One night, they had gotten into bed and hadn't fallen asleep yet when something very heavy seemed to thump on the roof. It was likened to a horse jumping onto it. They were frightened and became more so when the dogs didn't make a peep but seemed to cower for safety. They lay there, cuddling under the blankets in the one room with the fireplace burning the wood that would keep them warm through the night. Back then, you couldn't keep a big fire going because the chances of a spark was too dangerous. Well, after some time, they thought whatever it was, it could wait till morning to see what happened up there. Suddenly, there was a scrabbly sound and some strange breathing noises, and it sounded like something was trying to crawl down the chimney. Grandpa sat up and watched, but he sure didn't get out of bed and get his shotgun. When it was obviously getting very close, he lay back and he and Granny threw the covers over their heads and tried to hide or pretend that they were deep asleep. They could hear slight movement in the room, and I always remember that Granny said she could hear it lift the ladle and get a drink of water out of the bucket. Then the noises just stopped. It didn't go back up the chimney and didn't open the door. They eventually fell asleep despite being terrified. The next morning, they found tiny little human footprints all over the floor. At first, they thought they were wet prints, but upon touching it, they've come to find out that they seem to be greasy, like maybe it had Vaseline on its feet. Those footprints were there for years, no matter how hard they tried to remove them. Grandpa's tried to paint over them, but the paint wouldn't adhere to the prints, and instead it would bubble up. He tried to sand the spots, but the oily marks went deep. He finally got the bright idea to remove the floorboards and turn them upside down so the prints were now underneath. That solved the problem. They would discuss it from time to time until they passed away. Sort of sorry they didn't take a peek. But Granny always said that it didn't matter because all it wanted was a drink of water. I hope this will be something you find interesting. If you do, I could tell you some more. They're not very exciting, but they're true. That is all the story I've got for you for today, but before I let you go, please allow me a couple of minutes to address a few things. Firstly, I didn't ask permission to the subscriber who submitted the last story whether or not I could reveal their identities, so we'll leave them shrouded in mystery for the time being. But I think most of you will agree when I say, yes, we do want more of your story. I personally loved it, and if you did too, please show some love in the comment section to who we'll call Miss O for the time being. So address your comments to Miss O if you loved the story like I have. And of course, thank you Miss O for the story. Please don't ever stop sending your stories. Secondly, I do apologize if my cold is still affecting the narration. I mean, I know it is, but I've done my best doing multiple retakes on all the dialogues to try to choose the best ones, and it's taken me ages to finish this video. I'm feeling much better today, and I'm sure I'll feel even better tomorrow, so hopefully I'll get this bug out of my system soon. But until then, good night, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are. Thank you for everything. I'm truly thankful for all your support for this tiny channel. Hopefully, together we'll be able to grow this small group into a much bigger, much more vibrant community. I'm going to give my vocal cords a rest now. Have a pleasant rest of the week. Goodbye.